Yeah, like as everyone has said before me, this is pretty crazy. I literally expected maybe 20 people to be here, kind of a little powwow thing. So yeah, it's pretty awesome to see this. I'm Noah, one of the owners of Bissell Brothers, and we started using local grain a year or so after we opened. Wasn't really much of a planned thing for us. It just honestly just kind of happened. And it was one of those things of like, we found ourselves down this rabbit hole and loved it and just kept going down. And honestly, I hadn't really thought too much of exactly why that was until this. It was a very intuitive thing and has been from the start. So I did my best here to kind of consolidate those feelings. The very first one is definitely a relationship. It only kind of now do I realize like how much that was missing with the vast majority of the suppliers that you get. Yeah, a rep, they can be a great rep, but there's still so much removed between you and the actual thing you're putting in your beer. So that was just kind of like a really eye-opening thing for me of like, wow, we can have this too. I think in Maine we're kind of conditioned, I would say, to there's just not much shit that grows there, you know, in comparison to, you know, you look, especially from a brewing context, when you compare it to many other places, that it was like, wow. And I do think there's some degree of hypocrisy in sort of the traditional craft brewing narrative of like local, local, local. But then with that said, you ask the majority of, well, I don't have any figures on this, but it seems like a lot of people, like, where is the local? It's like, it's kind of like the coffee bean analogy. Yeah, like it's produced locally, ingredients are put together locally, but that's kind of where it ends. And I think that's not really in line with kind of the vibe that's kind of being thrown off by this hyper-locality thing going on in beer. So it's really cool to like kind of change that. I think like also I think Bart and Jason both alluded to hops were kind of the first stop for most people. I mean, everyone wants hops. Everyone's uncle says, hey, I got some hops going in my backyard if you want to use them for a brew. I'm sure any brewer in here has experienced that. And you know, you can do cool things with, we have a really good supplier in Maine, but I mean, they're only so big. The way hop patents work, you're only gonna get a handful of varieties that have been around for seemingly forever to me. So there's fun things you can do with them, but the same level. And it just seems like with that realization that we could use these things, like that there is an inherent responsibility to use them. Sorry, I'm very hoarse today. And another thing with like getting to know the Buck brothers, see you guys, is they're just relatively big, honestly, for a craft maltster, but still small enough where I can kind of pester them about like, it'd really be great if you guys thought about making a rye malt or whatever it is. Like, I can't tell Brees anything. Like, I can try, and it's no knock on Brees, but it's just a scale that I will never have any influence on at our size. And there's just something about all of that that just makes sense. This is going to be real tough, but basically blue, let's just keep it simple. Blue is basically, blue on these two sides is our main grain usage 2016 versus what we're using now this past year in 2019. Not hyper exact, but we were about 5% for actually malted products in 2016, and we're finally significantly over halfway of our grain usage all comes from the state, which is pretty cool now. Right on. The biggest thing though, like with all this kind of, same problem I encountered with this, like with all this making sense, the biggest issue we face is actually putting that narrative and story out to anyone else. That's been surprisingly hard for us. The story, yeah, it tells itself, but only to a certain point. So I think for us, definitely this will be tremendous. But beyond that, like, we have a silo. We've never had a silo before. That thing will be filled entirely with malt from Main Malt House. We're conveniently located right next to the highway too, so maybe a little co-branding opportunity there would be kind of cool. We are also slowly but surely integrating grain kind of labels into our cans. Again, to the brewers out here, no, that's a very slow process, just with how many cans you have to buy at one time. But that is a slow but sure thing. Like for instance, like our flagship beer, Substance, we make 60% of our production has been at like 96% main grain for 3 years. And not assuming really any of you know anything about us, period, but I can pretty much guarantee that no one in this room knew that. So that's kind of an issue. So yeah, and then I do have to say this because I have the opportunity. The only time in my entire life that I've ever been given measurable feedback that we are somehow ahead of Allagash was in 2018. First tour of the Buck Farm, and we were all very shocked when it was like, yeah, just kind of trying to get a feel for who else is buying from them in quantity. And it quickly became apparent that, well, actually, you're our #1 customer. So that has, yeah, thanks. Oh, yeah. I'll take that. So that's definitely been just an awesome memory, but beyond that, it really, I think, internally showed us that you don't have to be that size to actually do something with, locally made grains. And that is just kind of the closing message I want to leave. Like the size, as Jason alluded to, the size really doesn't matter. Like it's so much easier to integrate grains regularly into production than I think anyone really believes. So I think we're a case study of that. So thank you.